Welcome everybody to this series on valuing competency development. I'm Ron Hinn with PetroSkills, work on our member engagement at PetroSkills. Really pleased to provide for you some short excerpts on valuing competency development within your organizations, a question that we often get from many of our member companies and clients. In this first video, we will have comments relative to the value of a skilled and competent individual, and how do you quantify the value of that individual? Secondly, we're going to take a look at the opportunities to accelerate and enhance that value of that competent individual. And then lastly, we're going to take a look at how do you quantify the value of your development investment in a particular individual. Hope you enjoy these comments from PetroSkills CEO Ford Brett. Thank you.
Okay, the first approach on how to value competency development, are you sure you're spending the right amount of money to develop your people, is to look at skill development as a make or buy decision for new hires. So basically what you do with this is you compare the cost of developing a new hire versus the cost of hiring someone that already has the skills. This kind of dawned on me the first time when I was talking to an independent operator's drilling vice president about training and about how they needed training to train the drilling people. And he said, we don't have a training department, we have headhunters. Basically, what he was saying was, you don't need to train people, what you need is skilled people, not a training department. You don't need to hire reservoir engineers. You hire Spruill or DeGaulier or McNaughton to do all your reservoir engineering if you want to. They'd love to do it. Why don't you do it? Well, because there's a cheaper, better alternative. And so the idea is, can we compare the cost of developing somebody with the cost of an alternative, which is let's just hire somebody, and see how that compares? And this is not really possible to do for a company of any size. You can't have a larger company that's filled with pirates who just hire everyone off the street. So you do have to make or grow your own people. But this thing can set a lower limit for the value of a competent person. And you can see what a skilled person is going to be worth at least this. And so, of course, we want to know what a skilled person is worth, so we'll know how much money we can invest in developing a skilled person and it still have be a good business decision. That way we can avoid over-investing or most likely under-investing in developing skills people. So this is what we do. First step, you estimate the total cost of time versus time for salary and training costs. And so these are easy to estimate very accurately. And so if you're going to do an investment like build an apartment building, what's it going to cost? Well, what's the land? What's it going to cost? How much it's going to cost to operate? Similar idea here. It's like, what's the salary of the person? We're going to hire somebody. What's it going to cost? We know their starting salary. We know what their raises are. We know how long we can expect them to stay. That's what the person's going to cost. What's going to cost to train them? Well, what's the training program cost? What's the duration? What's the cost of this? Relatively easily, we can say, what's going to be the cost versus time for hiring somebody? Okay, step two, what's the value of that person versus time? Well, let's see. This is a little bit harder, but some of these are pretty easy to estimate. How long before they're worth anything at all? You hire somebody on the first day, they're not going to be worth anything to you. You will have more money if you had not hired them. At some point in time, they're going to start to add value. Here we say, in this case, say a new hire starts adding value after year 2. Where do we get that number? We ask people and say, how long before these people start contributing to the company? There's a learning rate, which is how long before we can kind of give them the keys. And in this example here, it takes 4 or 5 years before you can give an explorationist the keys to doing a project, or maybe a drilling engineer, a production engineer. And how long do they stay? And you can know that in terms of the normal retention time. The hard thing to do is to estimate what's the value of the person. Now, there's 2 ways to do this. The first is process-driven, which is hard, which is, what's the value of a drilling engineer in the process of drilling a well? What's the value of a reservoir engineer, a geologist, an accountant, whatever? What if you took that person out? How much do they add to the value of the company? And you can do this by saying, what's the value of a good engineer versus a bad engineer or something like that. But you normally don't have the data to be able to come up with a good estimate of that. And normally the people do not believe the value that you come up with when you do these kinds of things. What do our job expirationists contribute per year? How many barrels? Well, that's a lot of money. Is our expirationist really worth that amount? The second way to do this is by the cost of alternatives, and this is easy. Just what does it cost to hire somebody on the open market with the skills? You don't need to, you know, hire and train a drilling engineer or production person or reservoir engineer, geologist. Just hire somebody from from Shell or Exxon or somebody who's good. Hire them. And so basically, or get a consulting company to come in and do it with capable skills. So basically, we can come up and calculate the net cash flow versus the metrics. Basically, what's the cost, which we know, what's the value, the cost of alternatives, and the net income is the difference between those two. And you can come up with a net cash flow or value of a skilled person versus time. In this particular case, the net present value at 10% discount rate is $260,000 with an internal rate of return of 26%. Basically, what this says with this summary of cash flow versus time, pay someone $100,000 a year with raises for 12 years, a training program of about $10,000 a year for 3 years, compared with the cost of $300,000, maybe $1,000 a day for a consultant, something like that. This shows the value of making a person instead of buying that capability. In this particular case, is $250,000 or more. Get 26% return on your money. In this particular case, it's better to hire and make somebody than it is to buy them off the street. So you can use this approach to optimize an investment. And this shows a spider plot of the change in time to competency versus training costs versus the value of the training, and the change in the net present value or the percentage change in net present value based upon this base case of a starting salary of $100,000 a year, et cetera. And basically what it shows is that the things that are most sensitive to, and this is very often the case, is the time to competency and the value of the development. How valuable is the skills you're training? And if they're not very expensive to replace, then it's not very worthwhile. How fast can you bring somebody up to speed drastically controls the value of the investment. And so this is easy to do once you have the mathematics and begin to understand the effect of time and cost and speed of developing somebody. In this case, and in most cases, the time to competency and the value drive the return. And so we can use this approach pretty simply to begin to get understanding of how our people are valuable and what we can do to make them be more valuable. And so we use this to optimize an investment. And here's an example from a real case. There's an SP paper reference under there about drilling engineers. And it was we hired drilling engineers, and after 5 or 6 years, 6, 7 years, we kind of gave them the keys and they started drilling their own wells. So hire somebody at 22, by the time they're 28, 29, they're kind of in charge of doing their own thing. This old practice, compared with hiring consultants to do your drilling activity, had an internal rate of return of 21%. It was worth doing. But there were poorly defined competencies, no linkage between competencies and training, poor coaching, poorly defined performance measures, lack of assessment approach. But they really could develop somebody, follow them around, they'll teach you what to do, and good. The second thing shows an example of after they implemented well-defined competencies, linking competencies with training, formal coaching, performance measures, and clearly defined individual performance assessment, they could reduce the time to competency from which they actually went and became responsible for their own operation from 5 to 6 years to 4 to 5 years. And the internal rate of return on that investment was 49%. And so this is a way to begin to understand the value of time to competency and how much you can spend and value different kinds of training and development approaches. So this first approach is comparing a make or buy decision versus a new hire. I can hire somebody and make a reservoir engineer, make a drilling engineer, make a facilities engineer, make a production superintendent, or I'll just hire one. Compare those two costs and the different development approaches, and you'll be able to understand the value of developing competent people and help you to how to properly invest in people. That's approach